All right, everybody, get ready. We have reached my favorite part of the entire course, which is rhetorical analysis. And this is what I am super psyched to do. I love it. This is my favorite part of this writing class, is to get into these ideas about rhetoric and how to analyze rhetoric and to think about rhetorical thinking and how people think, and then use those thoughts, use language to symbolic language to convey those ideas and messages and try to persuade people. It's one of my favorite things. It's what I've done basically my whole entire adult life. So it's just, I get really jazzed. So the first thing is I need to make sure that you have watched this kind of introduction to rhetoric thing, or read that introduction to rhetoric thing. Hopefully you watched the video. There's like a 14-minute video that I've got posted in there, which will kind of give some of the background. I'm not going to get into all the background of, Aristotle and Plato and all the Greek rhetoricians and, all the folks who have come through history. I mean, that's for a different class. But I need to make sure that you guys understand what we mean when we say rhetoric, that it is persuasive language, that it is, that it's more than just language, though, because rhetoric takes the form of our actions and the symbolic representations that we have. So art and clothing and shapes of cars and what buildings look like. So rhetoric kind of bleeds much more across different ideas, different scopes of thinking and communication and influence. It's a huge, the rhetoric influences just about everything. But we're specifically going to think about symbolic and visual rhetoric, writing, perhaps. A lot of it's going to be visual rhetoric for some of you when we get into this project too. Anyway, so all right, so let's jump into it. So the first thing we want to talk about is when we think about rhetoric is the big three, the big triangle of rhetoric, which is ethos, logos, and pathos. And I'm sure you guys have all thought about this or had to engage at least at some point, maybe in high school, about ethos, logos, and pathos. I don't speak Greek, so I tend to I know what the words mean, but I do tend to kind of translate those into English. Ethos, of course, is like your credibility, right? So this is, when we think about credibility, let's think like, you need a heart surgery or you need a brain surgery. I get a choice. I get the guy who's done 10,000 brain surgeries and never once had one patient die, and everybody got better and they all became chess champions. And then I've got another guy who's never done a brain surgery before, but he graduated brain surgery school. So who are you going to pick, right? So that's kind of evident what this credibility is. And from that we get the word ethics, right? So your credibility comes, your ethics are kind of built into your credibility. Anyway, so that's what the ethos is. So if an ethos appeal, when we're talking about rhetoric, is, does somebody have credibility when they're making a statement? A doctor would definitely have that ethos. If they're going to tell you about, something that's wrong with you, if you need, medically you need to be fixed. Now, if I'm going to talk about, if you're in a history class, if I've got, a guy who's written 18 books or a woman who's written 18 books on the history of Rome and has lived in Rome and done excavations and all this other stuff, I'm probably going to believe that they know what they're talking about. So that's their credibility and their ethos. All right, pathos. So when I think about pathos, the word that I switch it over to in English is pathetic, right? It comes to emotion. So pathos is an emotional appeal. The one that, if you think about the SPCA commercials where you got the dogs that are shivering and the Sarah McLachlan song playing in the background, and it's all sad and, they're like, give us some money so we can help save the dogs. That's a pathos appeal. That's emotion. The problem with pathos appeals is when we're doing a rhetorical analysis, is that if you base your entire rhetorical analysis on pathos, on emotion, you're gonna probably have trouble. All right, we need a little bit more than that, because it's hard to quantify. It's hard to put statistics and facts and figures and be able to prove somebody's emotion. It's almost impossible. So while we may include some of this pathos appeal of a pathos appeal into our rhetorical analysis. What we don't want to do is have that be the basis of, the totality of our argument. It's almost impossible to prove somebody else's emotion. And then ethos logos is logic. If we think about that, that's my English equivalent, of course. So does it make sense? Is this, is the argument that's being made something that we can actually prove? 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, I can prove that. That's math. We can do that. If it's something that I can prove, then I'm going to say that that's going to be a decent logical appeal. Or if it's something that I can disprove, then that's a good logical appeal as well. So those are our big three argument streams of argument that we're going to make when we're doing when you're trying to use rhetoric, and then also when we're trying to break rhetoric down and try to do this rhetorical analysis. All right, so let's look at this image here. What we have, so let's look at it. What do we have? We have, first thing people will usually say is, oh, it's Ronald McDonald. And he's at a Burger King. And so the question that I always come is, well, how do you know that's Ronald McDonald, right? How do you know that that's Burger King? How do you know these things? Well, this is just your cultural experience. You understand this. But let's break this process down. We'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to break this process down. But how do you know that that's Ronald McDonald? You just, you have to have that. But what does the coat mean, right? What does the restaurant mean? What is this image trying to tell? What are they trying to say to us through this image by adding these different elements? What is this woman? Why is the restaurant clean as it is? Why would Ronald McDonald be in a Burger King? Doesn't make any sense to me. I think we already, automatically know what is being tried to say. What Burger King is trying to say through this advertisement, of course, is that their food is so good, their restaurants are so clean, their service is so amenable that even Ronald McDonald sneaks in undercover to eat at Burger King because that their food is better than McDonald's. But and that's easy to jump into that. But what we want to do with the rhetorical analysis is take all these elements that I've kind of mentioned a little bit and break them down and say, all right, so what's happening here? Why is this being used? What is the cultural reference that's being had here? We understand a raincoat. This advertisement makes complete sense to somebody who grew up in a Western American, maybe Canadian, British, maybe society, Western Europe, perhaps. But not even then, we can't be assured of that people understand that wearing a trench coat and a hat like that means that you're trying to be sneaking in and hide and kind of make make yourself not known or you're trying to be sneaky. So I don't know that that's the case. So there's so much here that we would have to break down to really do a thorough rhetorical analysis. And so let's think a little bit about what that means now. All right, so let's break this down, everybody. We like to start with definitions, of course. Rhetoric is, as it says here, the art of effective, persuasive speaking and writing. But what I think is really important here is the exploitation of figures of speech and other compositional techniques. So it's not just writing or speaking. It's also how are we composing? How are we going to put this image together? How are we going to, what is the light going to look like on a statue? What is the color of paint that's going to go? Is that going to help to improve or detract from the shape of a car? Those are all rhetorical techniques that we have to use to think about. All right, and then of course, analysis is just a detailed examination. And when I say detailed, I mean detailed. When we go into rhetorical analysis, it isn't just, this is what I think is happening. You're going to have to come at it and say, this is what I've been able to find, and this is how I can prove to you through evidence, through research, that my analysis of this piece is right. And I've been able to decipher what the artist's intent was, what their thesis is, and this is how I can prove that I'm right. All right, so let's jump into the steps. The steps here are pretty simple, and if you do them the way I'm going to show you, then you're going to do just fine with a rhetorical analysis. If you don't use these steps, you're going to have some trouble, and that's just what I've found. I've found that even if you just write them out, ham-fisted, this is where I'm going to summarize the text. If you write that in your paper, that's fine. I don't really care. I mean, I like it to be a little more artful, but what I would like to see is that you're actually doing the thinking. All right, so let's look at this real quick. So the first thing I want you to do is summarize a text. And what I mean by that is I need you to tell me what's happening within the text. So if that's in a still image, then you tell me what the elements of the still image are. If it's a video, I need you to tell me what the visual elements are, what the sonic elements are, what the oral elements, what are the colors, what are the shapes, what are the repetitions and all these things. I need you to tell me what you see, not what you think you see. All right, I want to get into more of that in a second because people jump usually straight into what they think they see, and I need you to tell me what you actually do see. Okay. Next thing I want you to do is put it into context, and this is where you guys are generally at a disservice or a disadvantage in just not having enough life experience. The older you get, the more you kind of learn and can start to piece things together. Oh, this thing relates to that because of this and that. But just not having life experience and the breadth of education that you need, sometimes it's hard to know, like, what does this thing mean? Why is this element of this composition important? So you're gonna have to do a couple things. You're gonna have to either research or ask for help. What do you ask around, what do you think this means? I don't understand why this color was used. I don't understand who this person is. What is this voice in this video I'm hearing? It doesn't make sense to me. Ask around and think. And you're gonna think, you gotta do some research. All right, so that's context. And we need to think about what happened at the time that it was that this text came out. And what was a reaction to? That's a big thing. All right, so next we're gonna go through a careful examination of the text. And what I mean by that is I want you to, all those elements of the text that you already pulled out, this color was used, this person was used, this theme, this type of language was used. Why did they use it? This is where you're gonna bring in, you're gonna tell me why you think they used it, why it makes sense for them to, the author of the text to have used this material, why did they use oil paint instead of, decoupage or something like that? Is there something that makes sense? And this is where you're going to do your research, and you're going to have to actually do research. You're going to have to go out and find evidence that you can bring back and say, this is why this was done. This is what this reaction was to, and this is where I got my evidence from. And then, then you're going to support your argument, of course, with your evidence from your text, and you're going to tell me what you think the author's thesis was and whether or not they were successful in achieving that thesis. All right, so let's look at this image. So this is an image that came out a couple of years ago. It was controversial, of course. The person depicted in it was and still is quite controversial in many aspects. And the risk that you guys have with an image like this is to jump straight into what you think is going on here, and this is tough because this is such a popular image, and it's really quite simple, right? But what we need to do is to break this kind of image down, right? So the first step that I told you is this first one is to summarize. Tell me what you see, not what you think you see. That's the first step, right? Be specific. Tell me what shapes you see, what colors you see, what colors you don't see. And I don't want you to assume anything. So the first thing when I do this in class and I have actual people in front of me, the first thing I do is what is this? And they say, oh, that's Colin Kaepernick. And I said, no. That's not what I'm asking you to tell me. I need you to tell me what you see, not what you think you see. You think this is Colin Kaepernick, but we don't know that for sure. I need you to break this down. What we see here is a man. I assume it's a man. Could be a woman. Who knows? I believe it's a man. And then we want to think, all right, well, older, younger, looks younger-ish. What about, is there anything else we can tell? Black, white, Hispanic, can we tell that yet? It's hard to know, right? It can be kind of hard to know from this image, but we know that this is a younger man, probably mixed race, probably not white, probably not completely black. I'm not 100% sure, but we're going to look at it. What else do we see? We see that the man's face is not made up. It's not prettified. It's not. It isn't made camera ready as we would normally see in a some type of advertisement that people are going to spend a lot of money on, right? So usually it's airbrushed pictures of people. That certainly isn't happening here. You can see the blemishes and the imperfections in this man's face. And we're also going to say that we're going to see just the man's face, but if you look at it, there's kind of an oval shape here, really, right? And so if you see the dark around his face, it's almost like a vignetting of an old photograph. That darker space that we're going to see behind his face is what we call negative space, and that's where the image isn't, or that's where our eye is intended not to be drawn to. So there's negative space happening here. And then there, of course, is some text, right? And so we see this says, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. Don't know what that means yet. We're going to set that aside. We're going to do some research and try to figure out what that means. Down at the bottom, I see a logo. It looks some kind of a logo. We're gonna say that there is a logo there, and then this thing that says "Just Do It." So these are the elements of the text that we have so far. Oh, also, let's go back and look at it too. It's in where the color. Is there color here? No. It's black and white, and that must mean something, that it's in all black and white. All right, so that's what we've done. We summarized this text. Now let's go back and look at the context. So when this came out a couple of years ago, what was happening at the time? So the first thing I want to do is I'm not going to be coy about it. Of course, this is Colin Kaepernick ad, so let's go back and research, what happened when this Colin Kaepernick Nike ad came out. We're going to go back in time. We're going to say, the weekend that it came out, it was right before the Super Bowl, I believe. And so there was a lot of attention that was being paid towards football in general at that time when it came out. But this is also kind of in the wake of his being released from the team that he was playing on, or he quit, or whatever it was. He wasn't playing anymore, and had taken up kind of his activist stance on the Black Lives Matter movement, and was doing a lot of philanthropic work. At the same time, we're dealing with so let's broaden this out a little bit. So at the time in our culture, we've got former President Trump had just been elected and was kind of at that vanguard of what we're seeing now is this division, this schisming of our society into these two kind of groups, and we're seeing a lot of at the time that this ad came out, we were starting to really see some of that really ugly kind of racial divisions that were starting to pop up, and the Black Lives Matter, and kind of a focus on police brutality and the victimization in minority communities. So all this kind of stuff was happening at the time that this ad came out, and it was a reaction to that. I mean, we absolutely have to say that, okay, so Kaepernick was kind of leading this kind of protest against otherization, against disempowering black people, black voices, all these other things that were happening at the time. So that's important, and I need to kind of talk about that. That's going to be part of my rhetorical analysis, to say this is what was happening. And then, we also want to think too, so when this ad came out, what happened? There was a very severe reaction that happened initially, and if we go look at the economic response to this, or economic fallout from it, we're going to see that immediately Nike stock dropped really quickly, and we had all this really negative racial, really hateful kind of reaction to this online, where you had these old white guys who were out burning their Nike shoes in protest, which I'll never understand, burning a $100 pair of shoes, $150 pair of shoes because you're mad that it just makes no sense. But whatever you want to do. But what we really want to think of is, what was the target audience? Because Nike stock shot up right after that, went up real high, because we really need to think, what was really Nike's audience at the time, or has always been. It's not old white guys. Old white guys buy one pair of walking, their old Velcro walking shoes once a year or every other year or whatever, when they buy shoes. The real target audience for Nike is younger younger people, particularly younger black guys who are playing, basketball and want new shoes. I mean, that's just a cultural thing, right? You look at black guys, young black guys, they got great looking shoes, right? They usually take a lot of pride in the kind of shoes that they wear. So Nike knew what they were talking about, but it wasn't only the American audience, because the American audience is a subset of Nike's global audience. So we also know that we have to also assume that if we look at in 2017, 2018, at that time, there's a lot of youth around the world who are buying into supporting Black Lives Matter in England and all over the English-speaking world, but also in other countries too, where people are in China, where we're starting to see the rise of this youth rise, and a lot more money that's being involved in the younger communities around the world. So Nike, I gotta assume, was probably, we could probably do a lot of research and try to find this out, but I assume that Nike was also targeting people around the world, not just an American audience. So we have to think much more broadly than just a football audience or a youth audience or even the American audience. We have to think globally, like what was Nike really thinking about? Okay, so then the next kind of step we want to get into is think about it, take this as a careful examination of the text, right? All right, so we've already identified these elements, that it's a man, it's Colin Kaepernick, I'm sure, and then we've got this vignetting. Why were they trying to, what's the history of trying to draw people into just looking at the face? Why wasn't, we identified the logo and the wording that was being used. So now's our time to go and do a little bit of research and try to figure out what those things mean. And we're going to bring that some evidence back into this evaluation of the text and say, okay, so why specifically were these things used? Why is it in black and white? What does that mean? What does black and white do to us? If you think just simply about black and white, the whole racial divide thing, I mean, that, of course, that makes sense. But why was the logo used? It says "just do it," down on the bottom of this ad. So they're saying, that's a rally cry, really, more than anything. So when we're doing this examination, we want to, use evidence to support the elements of the text. We also want to think about how it's changed over time. Does Kaepernick's message still hold today? It's only been a couple of years, so it's not that big of a deal. If we want to think about something in the past, from the 50s or the 60s or something like that, we can have a much better sense of whether or not that message is held. But it is still today, and I think it does hold, because we just had the Super Bowl, and Kaepernick is still kind of this lightning rod for racial division, and people really want to pile a bunch of real negative stuff or positive stuff on him as well. But that's all there too. So we could talk a little bit about that if you want. And then, and this is where we can start to really think about the author's thesis. What really is the author of this, or the composer of this this text trying to say? And we'll get a little bit more of that when we start to present some of this evidence. Then that's kind of the next step, is to make sure that we're the research that we've done, where we've tried to break down these ideas and try to analyze these elements. Now we're going to start to present some evidence, and we can do this in a variety of ways. You can, kind of present this evidence throughout, or you can kind of leave it all towards the end. It really it depends on the way that you feel that you want to structure this paper. But this is where you can cite your evidence, and most importantly, this is where we're going to look at the author's thesis. We've already kind of identified the author's thesis and said this. What they're trying to say, of course, in this advertisement is that Colin Kaepernick is right to have pushed against the white patriarchy that's within football and within the NFL and within the wider society, and that we support him. And but then what we're allowed to do, so if that's the thesis, is that Kaepernick was right in making his and taking the stand that he did, then what we need to say is, were they successful in achieving that message through the elements of the text that they decided to, through the elements of the composition that they decided to put together? Did it make sense? Did it work? Did their message carry through based on the elements of the evidence that they've presented to us? All right, and then this is also where you want to start to think about logical fallacies. And so this happens a lot too. I'm going to break down a whole video in as an example for you later this week. And I'll be able to point out some logical fallacies, and what that means is there something that just doesn't make sense? Because sometimes when we go to do a rhetorical analysis, we may think we're going to go into it thinking, oh, that, yeah, I think that this is the argument, and that they're right, or that they were successful in making that argument, but based on evidence and based on research and critical thinking skills, using our critical thinking skills, we may actually come to understand that the argument that's being made is specious at best and probably wrong, or manipulative, or maybe even omits a good deal of the information that would give it a much more true and responsible and realistic understanding of what actually is happening, as opposed to what we're trying to be told, kind of. And we'll talk a little bit more without that. But that's the logical fallacy: is when something is false, when that logic is wrong. All right. So here are some steps, some things that might help you. So you need to choose this text, right? And make it sure it's something that you can analyze. There are a couple of things that I know don't work. Love songs do not work. Hip hop, well, and not just hip hop, but I do pick on hip hop because it is kind of that genre of music and music video that often is about, look how much I've got, look how well I've done, I came up from nothing, and I got a lot of stuff now, and you know, that's fine. If that's the kind of music they want to make, that's fine. But it's really hard to kind of prove that. So that's why it doesn't make sense for this kind of a thing. There's a lot of really good political hip hop that makes, is some of the best for rhetorical analysis, and I'd be glad to help you out with that. To try to pick that out. And so we're going to go through this process. I need you to tee up what you think you want to do, and I'm going to kind of help you, guide you a little bit with that. So I need to make sure it's something you can analyze. Country music is really not good for this. Some country music can be. It's kind of like hip hop too. It's a little more emotional. It's a little more me based. So we'll talk a little about that. You need to read that text closely, of course. And then think about the context. And if you need help thinking through this context, I'd be glad to do that with you. All right, so some things that you want to keep in mind. You need to identify your text as early as you can. If you wait till the last minute, you're not going to have enough time to think it through. There's this thing that happens once you get an idea in your head. Your brain is always kind of think about it. If you decide to tell your brain, hey, I need to think about this thing, your brain is going to think about it all the time, whether you're sleeping or doing something else. So as soon as you get that idea in your head and get a little research done, that's going to allow your brain to do that thinking while you're doing other things. So don't wait. Things that you want to identify. What is the audience? What was the author's intended audience? You want to kind of really think through the visual or thematic, oral, that means the sound elements. If it's some kind of a video, don't sleep on the sound. Like, what is that? Why are they using the instruments that they're using if it's a music video or something like that? And then I want you to think through who is your audience, right? And then and think about also what kind of the format you're going to do it in. So I'm going to, if you want to do APA, you can. The majority of you all are going to end up using APA in the rest of your educational career, and probably if you're going to be doing professional work in your professional career. So you're going to need to know APA, almost all of you. If you want to do MLA, that's fine, but you're going to need to think through that. And then of course I'm going to do kind of an intro to MLA formatting for this paper for sure. A little bit later this week, to make sure that everybody's kind of has a good understanding of how to do that formatting of MLA papers. Anyway, I know this is a long video, but the rhetorical analysis process is really in-depth and takes a lot of work. It's a lot of fun. I like it. It's a fun thing to do, but it's gonna take some work, and it's gonna take you to think broadly. You might have to actually just stop and ask questions, and maybe ask older folks around you, hey, what do you think this means? Or what does this element of this thing mean? Just because I don't quite understand why this is here. And just remember that there's no element of any kind of artistic text that is not there for a reason. All right, it's all there for a reason. So you just have to figure out why it's there. All right, so you guys have any questions about rhetorical analysis? Man, I'll be glad to help you out. I love doing this kind of stuff. Otherwise, good luck. Use these steps.